Yeah, I totally agree with that. And when we talk about the truth, when we talk about truth, this is truth based on facts. I mean, to many people, the truth is that Jesus died on the cross, but that is not the facts. No, there's truth and there's truth. You've got truth based on what somebody told you, that's something that they can't corroborate, and there's truth based on facts. Facts are irrefutable.
Yeah.
Whether, but of course, you can say that to some people till they're blue in the face. You can give them the facts, I think, and they still won't accept it. But I think this is why, I don't like to use the word, but this is why religion is so dangerous, because people actually base what they hear from whichever denomination, and they tend to think or believe that these are the facts. And many, many times over, these things have been proven not true. I think that's what drew me to this doctrine in the first place, because there were many things that I was hearing that I'd never heard before. And many of the questions that I was asking myself and that others couldn't answer, be Muslim or Christian or Seventh-day Adventist or, I don't know, Jehovah's Witness, couldn't answer these questions. But the master teacher was just throwing out answers to questions that I've always had. And that was it for me. And when I was told and I managed to find out that all of the things that I've learned so far were based on facts, that's all I needed. Not that I think I have all the answers, because I certainly do not, but I challenge anybody else to come and refute our spiritual science. That's ours, that belongs to us, for us. We're so busy becoming what we're not, trying to be everybody else except ourselves. Not all of us, but many of us are hell-bent on being something that we're not.
Yeah, and the reason is that a lot of the narrative goes to the one who wins the wars. They write the history. So there was always history before conquerors, so to speak, whether it's physical or mental. And when they rewrite the history, and when children are taught or programmed with that history, you are losing part of your experience, ancestral experience. So as it becomes watered down, we become products of society with no roots, and that's why we're in the mess we're in now. The world's in the state is now because the guidance is not there. So we just see deterioration around the planet as well. So until we decide to reset and learn and relearn, we're going to be going down the wrong path, so to speak. So we have, for instance, we're brought up in school to look at the stars, and we accept that because we look up, we see something shiny in the sky. It's stars. We have a song saying "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," right? We have these songs, and we don't question it. And as you become an adult or an inquisitive person, and you're looking at stars, and when somebody comes along and says, "Well, every star you see is actually a sun, like our sun," then that just opens up another area of thinking of what's going on out there. So if those are suns, does that mean there's other planets like the planet Earth orbiting them suns? So we that's why we have to really do our own research. And if you find a vein, so to speak, like you find a vein of gold, you keep digging till you're satisfied and you're 100% no longer in belief, but in I know fact. So that's a little bit of how I see things. I mean, we can see the youths going crazy on the streets, but also there's young people who are grounded and are down. I should say down. They are actively moving towards knowledge and facts. They're not following the program, which is given to us through television and the educational system, which is edited dictation. We've got to look at how we're taught these things and taught how to assimilate and taught how to not think. We're not taught to be critical thinkers. That's the problem. We're not taught to be critical thinkers. Therefore, the creative side of it goes, and we just become drones. Go out there and find a job. Earn money, and like that's all that life is. And it's not about that. Ancient Egyptians, I think they spent more than half of their lifespan preparing for the afterlife, literally preparing for the afterlife, and they left their knowledge written in stone. Also scrolls, but written in stone. And with the master teacher, Nabab Yaanuwn, here in this time, here now with us, that knowledge has been brought to us so that we can understand and overstand what was there, what was left by our ancestors. That's what it's all about. That's what it's about.
Right. I'd just like to thank you for for your input there. And I'm going to introduce Nabab Hess, who is going to take today's class. So if you just come in there, and we'd like to welcome you, Nabab Hess.
Thank you. Right, I'm Habab Jadefreyatap, Manfuba Sabab, and welcome everybody to another Wu-Sabat Outformation class, or Wu-Sabat even, Outformation class. UK, the proof, part 15. So I think we've had a good introduction there, so I will crack on with what we want to be talking about today, which is focused, obviously, science of relationships is where we were at previously, so just going a little bit deeper into that and dealing with something referred to as epigenetics, as they refer to it as today. So I think the last class that we had, we left you with a sort of class on the messenger, breaking down the Dendora star map and going into that in some detail, and the sort of different gender configurations. We touched upon the 7 in particular, because as I say, a lot of confusion. It's obviously in the media, people cancel culture and all these different things happening. So it's important that we understand from our perspective, what those things mean to us, how it applies to our relationships. And as we've been talking about, obviously for 15 classes, that we're not men and women. We are in fact Nawep Mukwanu, supreme beings, obviously incarnated. And the purpose of a black woman and a black man coming together is to produce star children of the supreme beings. You understand? So that's who we are, despite what we've been taught to be. That is who we are, supreme beings. You understand? Have and always have been, always here. Do you understand? And so they say if you had to give us a date, it would be 76 trillion years. Do you understand? But when you really look at that, years in what context? Understood? Because a year is calculated, as you're aware, by the rotation or elliptical orbit of the planet and the rotation of this planet called Earth, or Ptah, rotating around the sun, as I say, 365 days, as they call it, and a little bit of change, making one elliptical orbit around the sun. So that's a year. So we existed before there was what we would classify as today's time. Do you understand? In terms of how that was calculated, and obviously a year in this context, the solar system would have to be here in order for a year to mean something. Do you understand? So when we think about how long we've been around, and our true purpose really has been lost. So obviously the brothers there touched upon the importance of Nabab Yaanuwn, and in this day and time, the renewal of our story. Do you understand? The 24,000 year cycle, you understand, referred to as the equinox, and the renewal of our story, the restoration of our spiritual science as Negroid people. Do you understand? Nagaru, black people, Africans, Afafraye, Ka'au, you understand? Which basically says in Sabaic, Afaf, from Ka'a, you understand, the spirit, you understand, and Afaf Raye, from Afaf Raye, sun, and then Ka'a, spirit, you understand, or is that some may describe as personality, do you understand? So from the spirit of the sun, so from the spirit of the sun, this is the true or recycled or renewed meaning of Africa. Do you understand? Afaf Raye Ka'au in the Sabaic language, you understand, from the sun spirits in that regard. So we are the children of the sun, literally, do you understand, as descendants, those sons as the Parnathara or the overseers, being our etheric ancestors, do you understand? But you also have physical ancestors, which in the Sabaic language they refer to as Salafu. Do you understand? They use another term, Nasabu, which means relatives, but the focus here today at least is on the your Salafu. We're talking to you in great detail about your 4 generational, as they refer to them in this English language, as ancestors, and the importance of those. And today, as I say, I think it's called Epigenetics, something Saviour, and so the benefits and Saviour. I can't quite remember the title. Something I'm sure I'll put it in the chat. But it's talking about there's benefits to that and there's negatives to that. So this is what we're going to explore in some detail, as it's the problem, but it's also the solution at the same time. This 4-generational understanding, the inward journey, some may refer to it as. So the master teacher continually talks about cleaning oneself inside out and outside in. And with the, I suppose, in this society, at least in the Western Hemisphere, the breaking down or the study of the human genome, there are many things in this society, and I think the brothers were touching upon this issue around truth, is because there's certain things they know, but they don't correct the records world over. So in schools, for example, they're still teaching, or may have changed that now, but they were still teaching for a very long time that hydrogen, for example, is the smallest particle, or the first particle within existence. When in the 60s, with certain experiments they did with a cyclotron and smashing, for 2 sets of hydrogen atoms together, they found out, well, hydrogen is not the smallest particle within existence. There are smaller particles referred to as quantum particles in that regard, but they haven't changed all the textbooks and corrected the understanding. The same goes a lot of the time for whether it's the discovery of mitochondrial DNA and the fact that the X chromosome is superior to the Y chromosome. They haven't corrected that understanding, which may help to remove sexism and the perception of how women are seen across the planet from the misinformation from the monotheistic religions. And the same way, where they know all of the races, the oldest bones on the planet are found from in Africa first, but never really sought to teach the world or correct the understanding from many of their scientists, who they still cling on to their fake knowledge and fake understanding, and teach the world that those in Africa, you understand, known as black people, were first and here before all other races. In fact, are the mother and fathers of all races here on the planet. And maybe that would have corrected racism, you understand, in that regard, in terms of teaching the children from a young age to remove the disease of hate, you know, saying called racism, let's say, from the human kind of psyche. But yet, in all of that, we seem to be able to prioritize LGBTQIA, you understand, and teach that to the children. But we didn't do that for sexism. We didn't do that for important scientific understanding of nature. We didn't do that, as I say, to eliminate racism. But what's taking place in people's bedrooms all of a sudden is prioritized for young children in schools. So, and then we're told that's not an agenda, in a sense, of gender. Yeah, so important, as I say, we start to focus and understand about who and what we are in the context of us and your development journey or ascension journey to become supreme beings once again. Okay, so I'm going to assume, just because we've cracked on, that the sound and the visuals are okay. So just going to start off correctly, just by giving acknowledgement to our ancestors by way of Partakyud. So just bear with me 1 second, I will set this up.
Matrix 14.
Okay, don't need those sound effects, just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so again, important to sort of understand how we start things off, and so we've gone through that in many classes, going into some great detail, and as I say, really kind of going through and understanding what that means in terms of the context of existence when we talk about Parpaut. But for full and proper translation, we say holy, 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 master, overseer, almighty. Then we say no God except Ptah, no savior except Yaanuwn. Ptah to us as the head of the nine, and Yaanuwn as the bringer of Wu-Sabat, as our ancestors, how our ancestors work in pointing one from amongst us, referred to as the Amun Nabab Raya Akhakta, to understand, to come and renew our story. As Yaanuwn in this day and time, the 19th elder becomes the 25th, or occupies the 25th seat here on Ptah Nun, or planet Earth, or Kawaktaha. Partak Yud, the affirmation. I am in the divine, inside the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is inside me. I am a part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I wish in the all expanding, as long as my wish is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So this is Partak Yud, as I say, staple, very important, and the reason why we sort of play or start to play with the tones in the background, it's because it's showing, I suppose, brothers and sisters, or sisters and brothers, however you want to phrase it, chanting together, so we get the full color of our tones. Do you understand? Be it sharps, flats, etc. Do you understand? And majors sort of fuse together, yeah, to provide that unified sound, that unified tone for us in its down time, which will be the key to unlocking our higher powers. You understand? That's fulfilling, as I say, our potential. Very quick introduction on the Zoom platform. If you've not joined us before, so if you need to adjust your audio settings for any reason, and if the sound kicks out for any reason, just please just drop a little note in the chat. If we see any loss of quality there, it's likely to be internet signal giving us some tricky problems, but I think we're okay for today. Got 3 buttons there on your panel. So the chat button there, feel free to give us any feedback in the chat, anything that's not questions. Select everyone as a distribution option, and feel free to post any feedback, etc. within that. You've got reaction button as well. If you're feeling something or whatever, then feel free to press that at your leisure. If you've got questions, 2 ways to ask questions to myself as your student teacher for today. So you can raise your hand and come in live and ask your question directly, or you can press the Q&A button. And if you don't want to ask the question verbally, then if you write it, one of the facilitators today will ask that question on your behalf. Yeah, so simply, if you raise your hand, you'll see this message appear on your screen once your name's called, and then simply unmute yourself, and then you'll be able to speak and ask your question. If you've dialed in today, I don't think anybody has, but if they have, those options will be slightly different. So *9 to raise your hand, and *6 on your keypad to mute and unmute yourself at will. Once you have the power to do this, once you ask your question, just sort of stay muted so you don't disturb the rest of the call, if that's okay. And so written question, simple, type it in, and then the question will be asked on your behalf. Okay, so no poll questions today. Lucky for everybody on that side. I'll say very quick introduction. I think it's been probably covered in the first hour. But Mary Abbott Dr.York is the mother, of Dr. Malachi KZ York, her born in June 26, 1945, in a place called Takoradi in West Africa in Ghana. And his father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, in 1922, and tragically, as I say, was assassinated in 1970. Do you understand? So when we talk about the importance, I suppose, of understanding who we are, then it's also important to look at who your parents are, being the fact that you see on the screen there, you're 1/3 your mother, 1/3 your father, and obviously the combination of those two creates a new you. Do you understand? Which allows, as I say, the aspect of you called the mental to express itself forward in you as the child. Now, importantly, we are a matriarchal culture. You understand? So starts off obviously with the females first. Obviously, monotheistic religions have downplayed the role of the female, but obviously not in the context of us dealing with Wu-Sabat. You understand? So here, important, I suppose, to recognize the importance of that mitochondrial DNA in this context, and the production of, as I say, going back it's giving him the Ghanaian heritage on one side of the family, and also on the other side of the family, giving the sort of Sudanese heritage, you understand, and obviously linking back then into the sort of Dongolawi tribe known as the Fuzzy Wuzzies today. Yeah, so more information on that, check out Hadayan, the guidance, a very good book just for understanding that side of the master teacher story. Now, as we know in the context of us, however, when it comes to our story being renewed, our story is always renewed from above. So the context of many things maybe in this day and time sounding less strange as they may have sounded when the master teacher first came in 1963, bringing this spiritual science referred to, I think, back then as Nawapu, you understand? Now, gone through various different changes in name, but Wunawap, now Wu-Sabat today, do you understand? Wunawap or Nawapu represents the people, do you understand? So, as I suppose, the Sabatu, do you understand? Or Sabians or Musbatu represents the people. Obviously, Wu-Sabat represents the spiritual science, and tying in with the ancient Egyptians in terms of being recognized by way of the star system called Sirius, which is the bridge between the 18th and the 19th galaxies. So our story's always been renewed from above, hence the term Outformation. Obviously, Outformation is dealing with stuff outside of the planet, this planet Earth, and when it comes here, it becomes information, you understand, on the surface of the planet. And then when we talk about things in the seas of this planet, which is a majority water planet, then we talk about beneath formation. Do you understand? So information affects your formation, affects your structure, etc., and your perception of the world. Do you understand? And so we need, in order to transform back into who and what we were supposed to be, we needed a being in this day and time, because, as you know, it's a battle of information. They refer to it as the Aquarius age, I think, in their schools, some of their esoteric schools of thought, which is in actuality the age of Ptah to us, you understand? And Aquarius is the associated with water, do you understand? In actuality, that's symbolic of ether, because the previous era in their, as I say, fake astrology was the era of Pisces, you understand, of the fishes, with who they refer to as Jesus Christ, you understand, and obviously when he multiplied the loaves and fishes, you understand, and it symbolized basically when he was baptized in there, I think it's Matthew chapter 3, where it was a shifting of the ages, because they were going from the physical rituals, you understand, insofar as he was baptized with water by John the Baptist, you understand, and then the shift happened in the day of Pentecost, as they refer to it as, where they were anointed with the Holy Spirit, do you understand? And so there was a shift from physical rituals to what would be called as the rituals of air, do you understand, or ether in that regard. And as you look as a shift in technology today, you see that we are moving from sort of physical connections of that old type of technology to things now being connected by way of ether. You refer to it as wireless, do you understand? That's not giving confirmation that what they're saying is correct. It's just acknowledging the fact that you have changes or shifts in knowledge and cycles depending on the type of cosmic energy that the Earth is receiving from the various different star constellations that the axis of the planet is pointing towards, you understand? And so around about 12,000 BC, the planet got hit, which was reportedly hit by a large meteorite strike. I say reportedly because in actuality it was a weapon which threw the planet basically off of its axis. So a lot of our monuments today, where we built pyramids and other bases here on the planet Earth, don't work anymore because the planet was thrown off of alignment. A new calendar had to be created, referred to as a Dendora star map. Understood? And that Dendora star map that we were talking about, say, a few weeks ago, the last class, reflects the fact of these different energies at certain times, whilst calculating when these different energies are hitting the planet, and it represents a shift in the development of human beings, you understand? So our ancestors and other cultures around the world, based on our knowledge, and our ancestors built their own calendars to track, as I say, the movement of the stars in relation to us here on the planet Earth. Do you understand? A science referred to as solar biology and also lunar biology. And so for us to be ready for what is taking place in the universe, what is taking place in our solar system, what is taking place within the natural environment, within this planet, referred to as a dimensional shift, we needed a guide and a teacher in this day and time. And our ancestors birthed and raised one from amongst us, really to show us the way to reconnect with them, as the known as the Nabab, who the Egyptians referred to or called this being Tahuti. Understand? So this is what you're dealing with in this day and time. The new spiritual sciences say that's designed to unify you mentally, and then the physical unity amongst our people can follow thereafter. The science of Wu-Sabat, the spiritual science by race, for us is the Negroids on the garden. Okay, let's get into where we were from the last time. So I think we left you with the messenger, I think Bastet's class, great class that was, and giving you an opportunity also to see sacred feminine teachers in full flight in that regard. So let's see where he was at. Yeah, okay. Musaltat, Bastat, Yaanuwn, so you had that class, you haven't seen it. You can go directly, I think, to the Wu-Sabat channel, or as I say, check out our class on our YouTube page. I think it's part 14. I think part 14. Okay, so let's look at what we were talking about before. So let's just go back a little bit. So we were really clarifying for you. It's Dendora star map that we're looking at, and so I think Bastet and Musaltat Bastet had said never been broken down in the way it had done by anybody on the planet before. And that class, I think we were making the point of showing that class as well, to say that I think it was released something like 2010. You understand? So when you start looking at some of the things we're going to show you in a bit, and see how well you were prepared really to be at the forefront of what's taking place really knowledge-wise on the planet. One of the problems with your sort of monotheistic religions today, or their monotheistic religions today, is that it's seeking really to hold a person or throw the person back in time. So they want you to live like Muhammad, whatever, 1400 years ago. You understand? Imitate a being. You understand? All around the world, you don't live in a desert yourself, but you're supposed to imitate this being or person that lived 1400 years ago, who lived a desert life. That's what you're supposed to live like. So you're stuck in that time period of Muhammad's mind, or what Muhammad received and what he recorded, and those around him. You move back 1400 years. If you're dealing with Christianity, you're supposed to live like this person 2000 years ago. Do you understand? Who not proven to have walked the planet Earth, but yet live like this particular person, be like him. Do you understand? Don't concern yourself with all the modern day challenges that we have to deal with today. You're supposed to live like a man 2000, you lived 2000 years ago, and live like that and apply that today. Or going back 3000 years and live like a man like Moses if you're dealing with Judaism. So all of these things are locking a person mentally, and they want to be physically living like characters, as I say, who allegedly, you understand, or Muhammad did exist, but the other two, you understand, there's a strong asterisk there, unproven, against that. So let's say you're supposed to be living like those individuals. So we now really looking at, let's say, how our ancients were living and recorded things, and how certain things were broken down. Needed to go back to a simple understanding of what we were talking about when we're dealing with male and female, genocide and gender, and really understanding this because of the kind of, let's say, biblical or monotheistic homophobia that is obviously conveyed in those books. You understand? And there's a particular reason for that, where, you know, of the deities of the Bible's interest in that issue. They don't particularly care, I think, what was happening in people's bedrooms. What they care about is that the production of children, do you understand, doesn't stop. Conversely to today's time, where this focus on this kind of LGBTQIA issue is to do with population control, do you understand, and slowing down the amount of babies that are being born amongst people of color on the planet. Understood? And so, depending on who you speak to or who you hear, there's a lot of sexual activity going on, not necessarily children being produced as a result of that. So that's and basically, if you're a person of that sexual persuasion, a black person of that of that sexual persuasion, it will be ignorant of you not to understand. Although there's obviously challenges of discrimination, etc., you would have to understand. Yeah, it couldn't be ignorant to the fact that that approach has been weaponized against Negroids or black people world over, and continues to be weaponized against black people well over. Do you understand? Whether it's been movies, TV shows, you understand? And what's now being introduced, trying world over, well, we'll give you certain funding as long as you change your perspective or your laws on this or that. Do you understand? So, and I say it's all about population control. It's not about what takes place in a person's bedroom. Do you understand? So if you're ignorant and don't want to recognize that, then you understand. At the end of the day, no one cares what's happening. Well, in Wu-Sabat, at least, you don't care what's happening in people's bedrooms. If you're that persuasion, then it is what it is. Most people in the context of this are born that way. It's not really a problem. And as we were saying, but is it something that you would promote to children in a certain way? Not by a case of like it's A, B, C, D, and then you pick the one that your child's feeling. No, if you're that, then that's what it is. You understand? And live accordingly. If you're not that, then you understand, you don't get a choice to be what you're not, and that would be fake. You understand? So it's a case of input. How and when you teach children that, and when you do that, I think is important in terms of them understanding the context. But what you're seeing now in this proliferation is that it's being made to feel like there's a choice that children have, and that's sort of, and there's no foundation scientifically for that. You understand? So there's not a choice, and in some instances, a lot of damage is being caused because of the lack of understanding of what is taking place, lack of understanding taking place genetically, lack of understanding of what is taking place spiritually. Do you understand? And we gave you a couple of examples in the last class. Remember that when certain human beings are born, the spirit of another individual who may have died prematurely, for example, can in-house effectively your universe. They can in-house your body because you have a soul, and Negro people, they have souls. So, and spirits which are not of natural nature. So a soul is of natural nature. Spirits in-house things of natural nature. They themselves are not of natural nature, but they in-house things of natural nature. So your body or your structure or your universe can be in-housed by another person's spirit, in the saying, if maybe they died prematurely, etc., and so need to live out a certain portion of their life. They can house the spirit of a child up to sort of the age of 9 years old. You understand? So if you had, let's say you had a daughter, for example, and they were in-housed by a person who lived previously as a male, you understand, when they had a carnal body, understood? That male may be in-housed in that individual's body, you understand? And if you react to the fact that maybe that child is expressing very tomboyish behaviors, for example, for the early part of the years, then you know that's what may be happening. Now at age 9, when this spirit being that was in housing your child now leaves, you understand, then your child obviously may revert back to what they are. Do you understand? If they were a female, for example, then revert back to that, and there's no issue. Do you understand? There's no hormonal imbalance or anything of that nature. So they're female. Maybe they take on traits that are maybe considered to be more feminine then they are masculine. Do you understand? But letting that process naturally play out, because it's not exactly the person, it's a strong personality in housing the person, and then now the person's got the opportunity, because that spirit's not there, to now grow into who they're supposed to be. So that's a natural characteristic of being a human being, you understand, or a supreme being in a carnal body, you understand? So where science hasn't merged as they would refer to it as the metaphysical with the physical, do you understand? Then that presents a problem, because you're dealing with people who are making decisions based on ignorance, you understand? So when people are giving opinions or they're making policy and things of this nature, always really, is it based on the science of it or the art of it? You understand? Because a lot of time and a lot of problems have arisen because artists, do you understand? Artists have been the ones setting or masquerading and setting policies and things and drawings and all this kind of artwork that's sort of perpetuated within our societies, masquerading as facts. Art has been masquerading itself as facts. Yeah, and if you really study that and really understand it, how that so the artistic impression of, you know, particularly certain European artisans, you understand, has forged itself or in the minds of human beings and their perception of the world around them, perception of even informed certain doctrines or enhanced or brought to life certain belief systems which are completely wrong in reality. Do you understand? Which is why I sort of say, well, understand, when art masquerades as fact, it proves itself, you know, detrimental to human development. You understand? When we are using art in the context of explaining our stories, yeah, we're using symbolism. Yeah, so our art is reflecting or coming from a place of knowing. You understand? And broadly, utilizing symbolism to make the connection for an individual between the world that they see and the world that they don't see. Do you understand? I.e., the unseen or the darkness. You understand? To make the bridge between the two, to kind of give you some insight, maybe the good word, to use into what is taking place in the dark. You understand? And connecting those two things together, which is what a symbol effectively does. It shows one thing, but it represents something else. Do you understand? And there's an illusion to that, which is being created to help us, as I say, understand the reality of the life that we live in and developing ourselves with it. So again, so we always had understanding of different genders, and as I say, out of the Tahuti's vision, you can see the 7 states of being, as they're referred to as, with the XX, which is associated with the female. You've got YX associated, or XY associated with the male. You understand? So XY, YX obviously more so male, externally with a female spirit. You understand? And then you've got different combinations of hermaphrodite and hermaphrodite. You understand? So, and as we spoke about earlier, I think in a previous class, even the, and I'm going to call it out a little bit, in the sense not to be offensive to anybody, but there's a little bit of selfishness really in both sides, maybe on the heterosexual side and in the LGBTQIA side, in when having children, not acknowledging. So when you've got heterosexuals, for example, who cannot have children, and another woman, let's say another woman steps into play, let's say they've got a disease that's affecting the mitochondrial DNA, and they use a third party, another woman's mitochondrial DNA to correct that defect. Do you understand? That is a trisexual situation. You understand? So you've got a couple who've had to use a third party now, understand, to produce the child. So that's a trisexual situation. So you've got a gay couple, for example, a lesbian couple, and you understand, in the same way, heterosexual kind of, and then they maybe masquerade that that's their baby. But that's not reality, is it? It's a trisexual situation. You should always acknowledge the third party. You understand? That would create a reality to a lot of the misinformation, do you understand, or the art of showing it. So if you show a picture and say, okay, well, that's two women produce this baby, do you understand? Well, that's not factually correct, especially if they got a son, do you understand? Now, if they produce the baby by way of parthenogenesis, then that's possible. But if you've got two males, for example, standing there and they got a child and say, well, this is our child, well, that's not reality, is it? It's art. It's showing a certain artistic view of what's happened, but it's not showing the reality. So either we're going to deal with facts or we're going to base stuff on art. So on the heterosexual side, we should have acknowledged, you understand, tri-parent situations, you understand? And on the LGBTQIA side, they also have to acknowledge tri-parent situations. And a lot of situations, what happens is the woman gets suppressed. You understand? So we kind of watching stuff like what's that program? The Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, shocking kind of program where women are being used, I suppose, as wombs. Yeah, for certain powerful families wish to have children. Do you understand? Of a certain Christian ideology, for example. But really, on a sort of macro, small scale, that's what's happening really today, isn't it? So you're getting the suppression of women in certain situations where they're not getting the respect, for being the one that produces that child. Do you understand? So the reality gets suppressed, it gets pushed back. The darkness, which is what that woman represents, is suppressed, isn't it? And the sense kept in the background, it's not really given its importance, it's not acknowledged, etc., etc. And so therefore you find suppression again in the wrong type of way. You understand? But people here smiling, taking pictures or whatever, having suppressed, let's say, this third party individual. Do you understand? So we don't need this fake living and fake life. Do you understand? So what we need is to get back to reality and acceptance of who people are, but the reality is how much in everybody's day-to-day life does what's taking place in somebody's bedroom matter, you understand, in the sort of forefront of things. You understand? It doesn't. It has really no importance. And all equality journeys are not the same. You understand? And it's very important. So a quality journey arising out of a defect, ultimately, when medical technology reaches the point where it can eliminate the defect, that is the ultimate equality journey or resolution to that equality journey. So if somebody's disabled or they've got a defect and society has to be adapted for them to live a better or more comfortable or less discriminatory life, then at a certain point, medical technology will reach the point where the option is there at least to eliminate the defect, and then maybe that defect going forward is eradicated completely. It doesn't even, if it arises, then it can be dealt with. You understand? Whether it's in the womb, or post. But being black is not a defect. So the black person's equality journey, if they're suffering discrimination from something called racism, there's no medical technology that's going to eliminate the blackness. Do you understand? So that you're black for a reason. That's just who you are. And if you suffer hate as arising from that, then the equality journey is to not suffer the hate. You understand? Hence why, as we talked about earlier, the fifth thing you should know, if I can remember them all, that truth, justice, equality, liberation. Do you understand? Truth, equality, justice, liberation. I think it's the fifth one which has come to mind at the moment. But it comes with those things. It doesn't just come on its own in terms of equality. Do you understand? So in terms of the fifth thing that one should know. So truth. So therefore, in its equality journey, it's not the elimination of the individual. And the same with being a woman. Being a woman, the equality journey to eliminate sexism or the dominance maybe of patriarchy, which may be suppressing some of the equality, is not to eliminate women. There's no technology there to say, well, eliminate women. No, but that's a different equality journey to somebody, for example, who is disabled, for example, sitting in a wheelchair. So medical technology will eventually eliminate that defect. Like, and what's an example of that now? Well, somebody's sitting there with bad eyesight, for example. Medical technology for certain eye conditions has reached the point where, a person can have laser surgery to correct maybe a defect in the cornea, so they can see without using glasses. Yeah, so glasses represents, in a sense, one of those pieces of technology that equalizes, the person's visual experience. Understood? Yeah, but we're using glasses now. Glasses is so normalized now that as a piece of technology that it's almost seen as part of the person's face, part of the person's identity. In fact, when you say it's a passport picture in certain countries, you're allowed to keep your glasses on, but you wasn't born with the glasses. You understand? So, but you're allowed to keep them on because it's seen as part of your face. Do you understand? So, but it eventually it will be eliminated. Understood? So we have to understand that not all those journeys are the same. Why is it? And it's important to understand who's speaking and from what perspective as well, because certain races' agendas are not all the same on the planet Earth. You understand? In terms of their origin and who taught them, and what their perspective is of life and how they should interact with others. Yeah, some are here to support life, propagate life, you understand, keep the balance of existence in play, understood, while others want to, as I say, take advantage of other races and suppress those races. So what equality means to all and others is not always the same. Do you understand? You have to kind of understand these contexts of who's speaking and what the agenda is behind it. Give me 1 second. Right, back again. So, in fact, it's the 6th thing that you should know. So let's read that. So, Nakuk Baruf Satu. Yeah, I know 6. Freedom, peace, equality, right knowledge, right wisdom, and right understanding. Understand? So, the fact of the matter is that equality comes with those 5 other items. Do you understand? In our consideration of what it means to have that. Do you understand? And so, but prior to that, you understand, we have truth, you understand, and justice. In order for us to achieve equality, then we need to deal with the 5 things that one should know. So in the 5 things that one should know, we have Ma'at. I know 5. Ma'at, justice. Hakuk, truth. Loyalty. Ma'ulment, commitment. And istakhram, I think these are old words, and devotion. Do you understand? So justice, truth, loyalty, commitment, and devotion provides us with the pathway then of freedom, peace, equality, right knowledge, right wisdom, and right understanding. Do you understand? So all of that to say is that one is not in isolation to the other. Do you understand? So we can't have equality based on lies. Yeah, so trans person coming along saying, well, I want you guys to accept the fact that I'm a woman. Well, yeah, okay, you are a woman up until the point where you're not. Do you understand? So we can call you women, we can call you whatever name that you choose to use, etc., up until the point where you're not. So a heterosexual man, for example, might not see a trans woman as a woman. So they may see them in the woman in the workplace, may see them as a woman on TV, may see them as a woman in all aspects of society until it comes to their bedroom. Then you're not a woman. Do you understand? So it's up until the point where you're not. And then for trans people want to say, well, or diminish women by saying, well, you're a woman with a period, or you're cis this or cis that or whatever, then what is a woman then? Do you understand? Because it now colors or blurs the lines to what a woman actually is then. And there's a level of disrespect in that regard, because no human being, irrespective of their gender type or persuasion, would be here unless it was by way of the womb of a woman. You understand? So it wouldn't be it. So in that regard, there's a level of disrespect coming in there by way of ignorance. So you can see that in the context of what we call somebody's equality journey shouldn't really be impinging on another person's equality journey. So this is why you have to base things on factual information, know-how, and knowledge. Yeah, so important to say in this context why it's what's mirrored or what it's buried sort of within is these other linked things. If you're making policy and it's going to affect another group of people, but at least have some base understanding of the gender types and what's taking place within inside human bodies and how they were set up and what purpose they were designed to fulfill. Do you understand? And just like, we're not interested particularly in what's taking place in people's bedrooms, but from a Wu-Sabat point of view, what we are also not interested in is the homophobia created by the monotheistic religions, because these configurations here, in terms of hermaphrodite and hermaphrodites, as we were talking about in the previous class, have naturally occurring, do you understand? Say born or created, I should say, in the 5th week, when gender is determined between week 6 and week 8 in a human being, depending on the chromosomal presence of what is donated by the male to female relationship in that regard. But in the 5th week, 5th day, 5th hour, 5th minute, 5th second, do you understand? 5th moment, that point creates in very certain unique circumstances these hermaphrodites and hermaphrodites. Do you understand? And so get referred to as gatekeepers. Do you understand? And so we understand them to be obviously very important in terms of opening up these gateways. As we showed you previously, open up these gateways. So part of our spiritual ascension, they're very important. Do you understand? And so don't fall into the category of sort of do you understand, of homosexuals or lesbians, but could get caught up in that lifestyle, not really knowing who they are. Do you understand? And so in this diagram here, in terms of these various different gateways, we see the blend of the colors in nature, and nature always splits things into 3s. You have hot, cold, and warm. You understand? We have male, female. You have the child in the middle portion there. You understand? So we can see here naturally sort of occurring colors. You understand? As yellow, blue, and red. You understand? And then purple really is a higher form of it's at the other end of the spectrum, in a sense. So it's a higher form of blue. So but in there you see these blended colors representing these hermaphrodites and hermaphrodites. Understood? Both genders not both genitalia, but the energy of both genders, and able to vibrate over and above the normal human being, enable them to open up certain gateways within existence. This one in this diagram is showing you the ones in the Orion star constellation. Obviously, the one that's important to us is in that northeast corner. You understand? So, and how we're able to jump between worlds, yes, as a result. You understand? One way to not only avoid death, but to avoid extinction level events that have taken place many times in the planet Earth's history. Do you understand? But yet, certain genes have always survived. You understand? So there's a way in which we've been able to avoid, being taken out of existence by way of an extinction level event. So there are things within our culture that oftentimes are kept hidden, and they've run up. Hollywood and others have run ahead and created movies and things to make the truth, or the hakak al-hakakat, the actual facts, sound as if it's fictional. Do you understand? So he's run up ahead, knowing this knowledge and understanding. And you were told this in the 80s. You understand? The class called True Light class called Who and What Are You? So this is our story. You understand? It's our master teacher. It's our doctrine, our spiritual science, Wu-Sabat. Understand? It's your genetic right to understand these facts and so reawaken the dormant supreme being inside of you. So we started off, as I say, I think we reached this point in the last class. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so so yeah, I think we were talking about why there's so much promotion, and really for those who are sort of maybe a little bit older or paying attention, you can see certain things coming into play, like twerking. Do you understand? Think about, when did twerking come into play and things of that nature. There's been cultural shifts that happen in front of your very eyes, and in a certain way, you sort of, depending on if you I suppose you follow social media, or you switch on TV, or you're into movies or whatever. Even if you're just sort of trying to avoid it, you understand? You see that you're almost flooded, mentally, with all this sort of information, where you become, I suppose, almost in a sense pacified and used to certain things now. I suppose in the case of some of the things that are going on, it can be detrimental to your livelihood, and if you carry certain views or express certain views outwardly that are not seen to be in the norm, even though, let's say, for example, in equality laws in the UK, you've got religious protection, then you've got protection against discrimination, let's say, for your sexuality. But inherently, those monotheistic religions teach hate. Hate is incorporated into those religions. You understand? And in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, for example, their Lord God, their Lord, introduced hate into the picture by bringing enmity between the woman's seed and who they refer to as a serpent seed. So he introduced hate and the various isms that arise out of that: sexism, racism, all the other isms arising out of that was placed in their genes. You understand? In that situation, if the story be true. You understand? Unproven story. But if the story be true, the Lord God or the Lord placed the hate in the genes. Yeah, so it's funny that, you understand, you've got laws there that protect, but they're not acknowledging that religion deals with hate. I'm not saying it doesn't have benefits, love, or etc., which they claim, but it also teaches hate. You understand? To have a special people teaches hate. You understand? Or you're going hell if you don't believe in this book, and I'm not, because I do. Well, they've got names for people like that. Name calling, kafirun, if it's in Islamic tradition. goyim, you understand, in the Jewish sort of tradition. Do you understand? So they got names for people. So it's hate. You understand? If you're not what we are ultimately. Do you understand? So that acknowledgement of that is they're not dealing with certain realities. So, you know, if a Muslim is against a Jew, for example, or somebody of a Judahite tradition or Mosism tradition, well, that's in their Quran, isn't it? So they're following the book. If somebody who's, I don't know, Jewish or Christian, for example, doesn't want to deal with, I don't know, gay marriage, for example, well, that's them following the book, isn't it? So the reality of the situation is that the books deal with hate. They deal with hate. So, you know what I mean? So you have to accept that reality if that's what you say you are. Understood? Which is very different to, I suppose, in the context of when we're trying to find out who we are and about ourselves or whatever, and we get labeled as hate. Yeah? Being black supremacist, do you understand? But labeled as hate for trying to reprogram ourselves to open our eyes, you understand, to the reality of what is taking place against our people, you understand, and then to protect us both mentally and physically for the abuse that's taking place on us, you understand. But to try and reverse that thinking, because the natural or unnatural, you might say, but the programmed way of thinking for the Negaro is to protect, yes, the white man, protect the Mukasu at all costs. You understand? So you're programmed to do that, to protect them. You understand? As we said before, God and the word God are the same phonetically. Do you understand? Yeah, taken from Gad, one of the sons of Jacob. Yeah, so G-O-D, you understand, and G-U-A-R-D. Yeah, they sound very close phonetically. Do you understand? And that's because, as I say, the God that you're really protecting is the white man. You understand? They're the judges, they're the police, you understand? They're the politicians who are the new gods in this day and time. Understood? Yeah, so they're in all the positions of power. So when they're talking about God to you, they're really meaning themselves. You understand? And so we protect them at all costs. And so the reversal of that is applying the medicine of Wu-Sabat, understood, into the Garu mind to reverse out that nonsense. You understand? Yeah, because despite what the many things that white people have done and do, not saying there's no good white people out there, but there are, because there are, but what they have done and do, yeah, you should be walking into a room cautious. You should be walking into a room on edge based on history. Yeah, you should be walking into it, you understand, at least in a state of anticipation to protect yourself. You understand? You shouldn't be going in necessarily in their open if we're basing it on our story. But yet, when you walk into a room, they're the ones on edge. When you walk into the room, they're the ones acting like they need to protect themselves. They're the ones acting like you're the problem. Understood? So how does that work out? If you look based on history. Yeah, so remember, when one black person does something, the whole race is going to be judged for it. You understand? When they do something, the individual person is judged for it. You understand? And even then, they'd like to make excuses. You understand? For the person, where their childhood, this or that. You can see it in the media. Yeah, somebody kills 20 people or whatever. Do you understand? For no reason other than the fact that their nature is one of evil, hatred or whatever, and maybe their nature is to kill. Yeah, they're going to basically, if that happens, they're going to be in the media telling you about the way the person was raised. You understand? Their parents this, parents that. They was a victim of sexual abuse or whatever the case may be. All excuses to cover the fact of that the person was acting out their nature as a straight up killer in that context. Do you understand? Didn't have the relevant programming, do you understand, or civilization that would have kept the nature of them from what they was gifted from their own ancestors at bay. And let it be someone whose freckles are too close. You're not going to get that grace. Yeah, they're not going to be looking into who your parents were and unless it fits a narrative of a sud that supports the fact that you are inherently evil. You understand? So they want to give the impression that you're inherently evil. Yeah, not that you were a victim of your circumstances or whatever the case may be. And there's some wicked people out there. Let's keep it clear. Do you understand? But excuse me, when we now start to get and looking into the genes and genetics, yeah, it's very clear, yeah, where this wickedness came into the genes and the genome per se. Yeah, so now looking to get that insight into the why certain things take place. Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before. There's a lot of programs like where you get stars going back into their ancestry or whatever. I say stars or famous people, let's call it, say that for the moment. Going back into their ancestry, and for generations. And in England, I don't know how it is in the States, but in England, when the person finds out they get white in their family, they're not mad about it. You understand? And oftentimes, there was one particular program I saw, which I won't say the person's name, but a particular famous person, and they went back into their ancestry, and the person who was speaking, he didn't have a decent relationship with. He had a good relationship with his father. I think he didn't had a so-so relationship with his father, but his father didn't have a close relationship with his father. Do you understand? Very absent. Absent in the person's life, you understand, in and out type of situation, having sex in different households or whatever, children in different places in different households, so on and so forth. Yeah, but what the program never really tackled from a point of where did the behavior start from is that in that context, this person's father's father was a white man, do you understand, who was going back and forth to Africa, do you understand, from England. He had a family in England and he had a family in Africa, and he was dicking down, excuse my French, this woman in Africa, had a family there who he would see once a year, twice a year, bring them maybe certain gifts or whatever. Not say he didn't have love for the woman or whatever, but he had two families. And likely the European family didn't know about the African family. Do you understand? And when they came later on to try and claim certain rights or whatever, they were denied because the marriage in Africa that he had was not seen as valid to the one that he had in England. Do you understand? So his descendants were denied certain rights. Now, the point that I'm sort of pointing out in this is that he wasn't mad at the white guy in the program. He wasn't mad at him. So this guy, and the way the family in Africa kind of remembered this particular individual. Now, whether it was for the cameras, I'm not saying he was glorified, but he wasn't held accountable for his being a deadbeat dad, basically. Do you understand? Not being around, for taking liberties. Yeah, because he had these two and he couldn't maintain it properly. Yeah, so not held accountable for those actions. But I guarantee you, the dad who looked like him, he was holding him accountable and them accountable for their behavior. But it's the hate created, isn't it? Do you understand? It's the behavior that the behavior created. Now, I'm not saying to say that you are going to be exactly what your ancestors are, but the issue is, and what we've been seeking to point out to you, is that the hidden behaviors, of being a spiritual being or supreme being incarnated in a physical body, means that when you jump into that body, you have to deal with 4 generations of behaviors. Do you understand? And if you're not aware or self-aware, which through ignorance we haven't been, then those behaviors can have an influence on how your life is going to play out. It's one of the reasons It's one of the influences of how your life is going to play out. And in this context, they didn't hold accountable the white guy in this instance who was the starting of the problem. Yeah, within the 4 generations. He was the start of the problem. He was the deadbeat dad, which led to deadbeatness now flowing through other males, or them not respecting, this is the key point, they're not respecting the African side over the European side. The European side, the marriage was valid. The European side, the family was more valid. Do you understand? The African side was not valid in that way. It didn't have the same status. Yeah, and so that carried through. It carried through, you understand, for generations' time. Now, whether he now, because he looked at it, having that awareness, can say, okay, well, maybe I'll do something different. You understand? Well, I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm not going to be like my granddad. You understand? But he wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to be like my great-great-granddad. There was a thing of, oh, I've got white in my family. You understand? And that feeling, oh, I'm mixed. Because you know the kind of mindset of that people seeing that as something agreeable or positive. You understand? This is the miseducation, the program, how deep it is. You understand? Where, as I say, I think we said in the last class, it's particularly in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the States, obsessed with interracial relationships. Obsessed. Yeah, and that's purely programming. Purely programming. You understand? And now mixed race really is the new black. Yeah, or neutrinoid is the new black. Particularly in this country. Yeah, so these are the things where, you know, out of genes, as I say, are messed up. I think it was described in Feeding the Forces. I think we read the quote in a previous class where the master teacher is expressing the fact that this genetic confusion or realigning genes with where they should be etherically at the point of death is a gargantuan task. And saying Rayeh or Rayeh Hara Echet, and saying the program to realign all these genes at the point of death back to where they should be, according to their ancestry, and so that our ancestors, for example, are not in lower ether states or energy states where they can be used as etheric batteries for other races. The requirement to fix all of that obviously is a real problem. Do you understand? Which is one of the purposes of what they refer to as the golden children. So in terms of that realignment, and why the master teacher is important, because of his ability to discern between these different energy states, be it the physical or plane of force, spiritual, mental. Do you understand? These planes within existence, finite forms of energy, and be able to discern between them, so that you understand, well, how to move between those states. And which is what the golden children, we have them all in us as Nagarus, understood, but the remembrance of things that we haven't experienced before is difficult, isn't it? So you haven't experienced something, how can you know to align yourself with something that you don't know? Even you're not sensitive enough knowledge wise, or in terms of your skill or the ability to discern between the two, understand, to be able to transform from one to the other, do you understand, or vibrate on a certain level in order to attract certain energy towards you and pull it out of those lower realms, for example. Understand? So these genetic kiss doctrine, do you understand, this understanding of genes is a sort of, I would say, the last bastion, but before of information, but it's sort of this threshold that we sort of step into now, where as Marcy said, you need mature people when we're discussing about genes, because you're going to be accountable now for the very decisions that you've made, and in some instances it can be reversed, in some instances it can't. Do you understand? So you have to learn to program forward, understand, i.e. your children are going to have to do better than you, because your children are you. You understand? So you program forward, and they have to program forward in order to correct things. This is where our level of selfishness, you understand, versus selflessness needs to come into play. understand? And the enemy, if you want to call it that, the Illuminati and others, you know, Adam Weishaupts and those type of people, you know, who formulated the Bavarian chapter of the Illuminati. You understand? One of many around the world, for example. And when they were creating the protocols of the Elders of Zion, for example, they had to have known that the plans that they were putting into fruition would not be completed within their lifetime. You understand? So they had enough, if you want to give them credit or not, but they had enough foresight, you understand, to say, well, listen, we put the plan in place, but it's going to be carried on by others. You understand? Not we ain't going to be able to complete this. And in a similar way, you know, us as Musbatu, do you understand, have to understand that basically, in order to correct the issues that are happening with our race at the moment, yes, there's certain things in this generation that we can do, but you're going to have to program forward. You understand? For that change really to come into its proper fruition. Do you understand? Excuse me. In the physical sense, at least. Understood. So let's roll through what we were at the last point. You understand? So, excuse me. So we were touching upon the fact of where this kind of focus on the human butt that's coming into play. And as I say, this is arising, from population control. You understand? But we'll start from 142. So it says it's now promoted, just as twerking and attraction to the female's butt promote a desire for anal sex, which also affects the male on male anal sex. 143. When it's not born in them, it's a choice by persuasion by the media, being that that was the norm in Adamite Canaanite history in both Greece and Rome, which spread all over Europe and then spread to the West. 144. These are part of the devil's new laws on Ladad birth control. Their rules and regulations on birth control is to promote these forms of sexual pleasures as they seek to imprison most Negroid men in the West to expose them to these forms of contact. It is planned by the race of devils. 145. All about butt, then anal sex with both male and female, and this is not about those born male, khatat body, with a vanas tasu, feminine spirit, or those born with a female, khatat body, with a male spirit, or the hermaphrodites and hermaphrodites, and hermaphrodites. So we've done that in some great detail. So check out, I think, parts 14 and 13. Gone into that in some detail. Hormone sexuals, you understand? For that understanding. If there's questions, please ask. 146. This is not about the Bible and Quran homophobia. It's an actual plot because people of Lawan color produce Kharadu children on a much larger rate than the Leben Salah white race. So their production is on the decline world over. 147. In fear, they came up with this new program to attract all to the butt and female on female kissing, which leads to sex by females who were not born with male spirits naturally attracted to the same sex. So in the context of a hormone sexual, for example, you've got a woman who is a female, obviously physically in the same, but chemically inside, or the hormones are projecting a strong male. Internally, she's a male. The internal male spirit is attracted to the external female form, so therefore you're getting what appears to be same sex, but it's still male to female, but it's hormonal male attracted to physical female. Do you understand? So, and then reverse, obviously, for the males. You understand? And then the extreme of that is trans. Yeah, so it's a defect oftentimes arising. I don't mean defect as in to be derogatory. It's a defect happening in the birthing process. As I say, 6 to 8 weeks in the birthing process is when gender is determined. If a mother is stressed out, do you understand, for some reason, or it can cause a chemical imbalance, you understand? So whereas a hermaphrodite and hermaphrodite are the same as being born male, no issues, or female with no issues. Do you understand? So it's exactly the same. Do you understand? So if somebody might ask you, were you disappointed if your child's whatever, gay or whatever the case may be? Well, you in that context, if you had this knowledge, you might be like, okay, well, I'm happy if they're male, I'm happy if they're female. I would be happy if they're hermaphrodite and him or hermaphrodite, but I might not be happy with if they were lesbian and gay, not because they're lesbian and gay, but because you're aware that something's gone on in the birthing process. You understand? Okay, well, the stress was because we were homeless. You understand? And so that led to now stress within the pregnancy. So you might be disappointed because, well, I didn't take care of, you know, saying if you're the male, you're a woman, or a woman's feeling, well, I didn't take care of myself in that situation. Well, I was in a situation where I couldn't take care of myself. So you might be disappointed for those reasons. You understand? Because you've now ended up, or a defect has arisen in the birthing process, which had you known about it, you would have controlled it. You understand? So very important that we understand that just because a lot of people are having babies and they're not dying in childbirth because of advances in technology, that is not a reason to think that it's not sacred, or, do you understand? It's not important. Women today still die in childbirth. You understand? So so if you're thinking about preparing the importance of a child that's going to live for 100 years, and the first or so, do you understand, or up to, then how they're prepared in the womb and even beforehand, obviously is exceptionally important. Do you understand? And so these lead to these kind of inconsistencies, you understand, or defects. And so defects are part of nature. Do you understand? Even for supreme beings. Do you understand? In the Black Book or Sacred Records of Atum Re, yeah. Remember, even for us, it talks about corrections that have to be made to our genome. Do you understand? I think 73. I think was the number. Actually, in fact, let me not do that. Let me get the actual number and read that section. 1 second. Just bear with me. Let me go into the laboratory. Just bear with me. Now, interesting enough, I was watching something the other day, film-wise, and the introduction to this book, I'm trying to remember what film it was. The introduction to this book almost was exactly the same. In fact, it was Man of Steel. That's what it was, Man of Steel. The introduction of, now this book came out well before Man of Steel, but the introduction of the Sacred Records of Atum Re, it was like, I'm watching this Man from Steel, and you're listening to the introduction of the Sacred Records of Atum, which came out way before, say, Man of Steel. Yeah, check it out. Let's see now. Spare me 1 moment, people. While I'm looking for that, any questions? Right, and Nabab or Man?
No, I don't see any questions here now.
Right, okay, so here we go. So it says your planet, I'm not going to go through the background, but effectively it's talking about how the Natharu basically manipulated environments, planetary environments, in certain instances in their say maybe the word migration, or their leaving of risk, how they adapted certain environments in order to suit their species. And in some instances, they changed the ecology of a planet, for example, to suit them, or they may mix in with certain indigenous life forms to that planet and created new aspects or versions of themselves in order to survive in certain environments. Yeah. Okay. So let's read from here. So it says trees were growing or transported. This is talking about the rebuilding of the planet Earth. That's after the crash of 24 billion years ago. So it says trees were growing or transported from other planets. Why you have so many plants on this planet that attack and kill one another, and so many different kinds of plant species. Many different kinds of insects were also transported to balance the ecology. These transportations of insects and plant life from other planets brought about all different types of air and environments, climates, diseases, and colds and sicknesses to Earth. Which is why during the pollination seasons, some humans get allergies while others don't. Some humans catch severe colds during the winter seasons while others don't. Many humans have allergic reactions to certain food intakes while others don't. Your planet became a ground for all types of beings to survive. It was destroyed by several meteorite showers, then replenished over and over again. The sea is filled with all forms of alien life forms for food and many skin diseases, blood diseases, even allergic reactions. With these beings comes different types of climates, diseases, cold, sicknesses, not to mention the scientific experiments and breeding of humans was abruptly disrupted by invading disagreeable beings, and this Homo sapien project is not complete. Thus, humans are in serious need of upgrading to divinity. Creation took place a period of 6 days. It was brought to a completion on the 7th day. After this creation, human beings needed 112 corrections, of which only 76 has been done up to date, 1998. Thus, you need 36 more corrections. Yeah, so this is talking about, even in a point he was making is that even when you say the word perfection, for example, it has an ION at the end of it, and so it's leading up to that state, isn't it? So even with us in this state, being certainly the strongest or having the supreme genes in comparison to other races, we're still part of a program of correction that needs to be taken place, for example. So if you were to put your palm, for example, flat down on a table or surface or whatever, basically in terms of the corrections, you'll see that so the finger next to your little finger, for example, it's a bit more difficult to lift that up. Yeah, so with all your hands, all your fingers facing up, that finger, is a little bit more difficult to lift up independently than the rest. In fact, sometimes when you try to lift it, the other fingers move, for example. So that's one of the types of corrections that has to be fixed. Yeah, so we're perfect, but we're not perfect, if you understand the point being made. Yeah. So let's continue. So in 147, we'll start from that again. So in fear, they came up with this new program to attract all to the butt, and female on female kissing, which leads to sex by females who were not born with male spirits naturally attracted to the same sex. 148. So you females who have exchanged more than 4 Ayashu males' body fluids by oral sex or other forms of sexual exchange must be careful not to let those inner voices affect how you relate to males. Yeah, so we talked about this again in the previous class, the rules of nature, and how, say, more than 4, because it takes up to 9 years to remove foreign DNA out of your system, you understand? Then in that instance, what can happen is that too many males, or as I say, genes, it can disrupt, in a sense, the sort of inner voices or your own thinking, creating white noise inside of you, which, as I say, can disrupt your link that you have inside of you to the mental. Do you understand? So your soul can become compromised if you are not the ones making the decisions. Now, one can think that they're making the decisions because the inner voices, that through ignorance, those inner voices may have played out to the individual in ignorance, like that's their voice, like those are their ideas. You understand? Not knowing the naturality, you've got this DNA inside of you where others are expressing their ideas, and if you go with them, then you suppress the real you. Understand? So not realizing that a lot today where you get a lot of different people having a lot of sex in the Western Hemisphere and then internalizing, maybe in the context of, I suppose, in context of women, they're sitting there, or it's been expressed in the media that their liberation, which is a shift that's happened in 2012, where the world is shifting to more matriarchal than patriarchal, not more, but it's shifting to matriarchal because the planet is, its axis is moving towards the center of the galaxy as opposed to pointing away from it. And that changes the nature of the energy on the surface of the planet Earth. So therefore, we were moving more towards matriarchy, seeing the rise in female leadership. That's been co-opted a bit in a similar way how hip-hop, you understand, was the force, one of the forces of the hip-hop generation to rebel against the status quo of oppression that was produced by the Mukasu on blacks. You understand? Hip-hop in its early iterations, represented the breaking away of that, an ability to express or spit facts or information, retain information. There's a conscious shift, you understand, away from, complying, let's say, with the status quo, complying with the misinformation, complying with the lies, complying with the, or you understand, or putting energy into a society that continually showed itself to be harmful to people of color, particularly blacks. Do you understand? So, so that was the breaking away of that, but it got co-opted because environment is key, isn't it? Yeah. So with the emergence of gangster rap and these different types of things, so that conscious message was now lost in terms of the mainstream, and it shifted the nature of it. I mean, there's a time and era in hip hop where cursing wasn't really even a thing. Too tough in a lot of that early music. Do you understand? So, so that shift kind of came in and changed the nature in what was supposed to be, that kind of mindset, a seek and destroy mindset for these new souls that would come in here, and that would develop a kind of protection for our race. You understand? Soldiers that would be there to protect our race. In a similar way, you've had this shift now in a rise in female leadership, where it appears in certain instances the expression of that is, sexual liberation, do what you want sexually, etc., etc. Well, understand, if we're just going from a mental point of view and behaviors, and if somebody's not calling you out now to say, hey, that behavior is wrong, that you feel, well, why should I be judged for it, so on and so forth, that doesn't mean that there's no consequences. So because whatever, slut shaming now, you can't call somebody a slut because you're slut shaming, doesn't mean that there's not physical consequences to certain behaviors. Do you understand? Again, smoking is legal. You understand? So, yeah, smoking is legal, but it doesn't mean there's not consequences to smoking. Yeah, you can walk into a McDonald's, and if you want to order 10 milkshakes and drink 10 milkshakes, you can do that. You understand? But doesn't mean there's not consequences to that type of behavior. Do you understand? So just because you can do something doesn't mean there's not consequences to doing it. Or just because they allow you to do something doesn't mean there's not consequences as a result of that. You understand? So they want to break down the barriers of, maybe what religion, let's say, previously policed, yeah, or what came out of religion previously policed the kind of morality around certain things. And as you know, with the New Order, what's one of the characteristics of the New World Order? Well, one of the new characteristics of the New World Order is the removal, isn't it, of monotheistic religion. Do you understand? To remove its power, for the establishment of sort of New World Order. Is what you learned about, from the 70s, the 80s, or whatever, in various iterations of books, the Afghan 666, and many different revelations, all these to break down, so on and so forth. Yeah, so to give you that sort of knowledge and information. So in a similar way to how hip hop, or the shift, I say, of gangster, or the implementation of gangster rap, understood with NWA and others, brought in, you understand, a change or a shift, because early NWA, really, it was gangster rap. It was anti-establishment, you understand, to some degree, anti-police, not anti-police, but anti-police brutality. Yeah, that's what it was anti. So it was anti against the things that were, in some instances, I'm not saying all of the tunes, but a lot of it issues, and going against that was detrimental to our people. You understand? Ice-T, yeah, Cop Killer, all these different types of tunes or whatever. But yet, what did they do? They offered certain people the big bag, as they call it today, isn't it? And then what do they do? Notice how many rappers end up playing police. Yeah? All these rappers that were against police ended up playing police. So you got a tune called Cop Killer, but you understand, in Ice-T's situation, for example, but they then bring him into the movies, you understand, and dilute the message that he was bringing with that, rightly or wrongly. Do you understand? But they dilute that message by making him play the very thing that he said he was against. Yeah? New Jack City, what did he play? And he's been in a program for many years. I don't watch it, but been a program for many years, which Mike Epps does a great impression of. Law and Order or something like that, I think he's in. But he's been playing police. He got a tune called Cop Killer. Same thing with Ice Cube. Same thing, isn't it? Ice Cube was playing what? Playing police. Yeah, after the many tunes that he had. Well, he's part of NWA, you understand? Yeah, so this is how they do to neutralize the power. It's not so much about what was being said, it was the power that was coming through to rebel against the Makasu way of doing things. You understand? The ghostational forces, of 6,000 years that come to its end of its cycle, and a new mindset needed to come back in. You can understand now, I suppose, scientifically, how that's come in. You understand? As a rebellion, you understand, or an outpouring against our people being falsely kidnapped. Do you understand? But coming back around to what we're talking about here, so the impact of taking in too much, you understand, fluids, and let's say 4 partners in this day and time, over a lifetime, for example, or within a stretch of consecutive 9-year sections or whatever. So you never, you know what I mean? So if I got taken, then I got to lose in it. But I'm taking on, I got to lose over a 9-year period, for example. That's not a lot of partners today. Do you understand? So over a person's lifetime. But people are on a madness right now. The young people, in certain instances, females got, let's say 30 people, 40 people, do you understand? Not even out their 20s. So what is that doing then to them mentally? And then what kind of child are you then producing? So the agenda here is not population control, but then what kind of child are you producing? You understand? Because is it now, are you giving yourself the best ability to produce supreme beings? You understand? And because society, as I say, is not judging, then maybe in whatever circle, you're seemingly to get away with certain things like that. In the media, that's how it gives that impression. In the media, I mean, that's saving real life in the media. We talked about previously, and I have to reiterate this point, because about this thing within our doctrine referred to as religiosity and how you're seeing it play out. So if you can convince a lot of people understood that wrong is right, then it's going to feel like you're right. Yeah? Let me say it again. If you can convince people that wrong is right, then because the majority of people are thinking wrong is right, now you feel right. Doesn't mean that you are right. It just means you feel right. Yeah, so, excuse me. A drug dealer, for example, who wants to make drug dealing acceptable, if enough people in the media are promoting and propagating, you know what I'm saying? Everybody seems now to have sold white on the come up. You understand? That's what it seems to be the case now. Some of the young people, yeah, I sold and turned my life around. That seems to be the narrative. You understand? I remember boxers. If I didn't box, I was in a life of, I would have been in prison or in a life of crime. You understand? But now, obviously, that's been replaced now, the boxing story, by the drug dealer story. Understand? So, if enough of that now, so now it's feel, because it's been propagated so much in the media, that which was felt wrong now, you understand, feels like it's right. Stripper culture, you understand, or strippers. Strippers was on the moral end of wrongness. Do you understand? But now stripper culture is now become mainstream culture, so it feels like it's right now. Do you understand? And so Master Teacher spoke about this in terms of how the religious approach called religiosity, you mentioned it. How, you understand, people who, you know, in a belief state, have convinced themselves, for example, that a child can be born, a male child can be born without the presence of a Y chromosome, for example. But if enough people believe that to be the case, wrong becomes what feels right. Do you understand? So now that's become the status quo of a certain type of belief system. Excuse me. So this is important because, as I say, they understand that these shifts in nature take place, and they're opportunities for us to transform ourselves out of the situations that we find her in collectively as a race, but they then get co-opted now with the kind of anti-plan, which has now hijacked that shift, which was supposed to be the growth of female leadership, the restoration of the matriarch, now has become stripper culture. Do you understand? Which obviously is permeating the world and has led to justification, let's say, for sexual looseness. Now, as I say, if there were no consequences, men and women should do what they want. Do you understand? But in the context of us on this ascension journey, as you know, the 9 must rule the 6. So with the freedom, and so which you read about earlier, it comes with other things, doesn't it? Understand? Right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding. So in that, the freedom comes certain responsibilities that arise now knowing versus not knowing. And so in certain instances, yes, we may be able to correct these failings through our ignorance by reversing our behavior, and in some instances we would have to make sure that the children or the genes are programmed forward. You understand? So let's get into the program forward bit. You understand what we're talking about here? Any questions?
No questions.
No questions.
All right, I appreciate that. Okay, so 149. So even if he is still alive, his male Salafu ancestors affect you. This has now been confirmed by scientists who took female mice for an experiment. 150. What they did was they took these mice and exposed them to a certain flower by sight and smell, and brought them close and shot them repeatedly. This was done for 4 days. 151. After they stopped for a week, then when they exposed the mice to the flower, they examined that the change in their damagh brain, they notice fright, fear, and terror with no shock. 152. Even worse, they observed their next generation of mice and found out that the children of the first generation of the experiments passed on this to the next generation, who, if put before the same Nawa kind of flour, they would react with fright, fear, and terror without a shock. 153. This passed on for only 4 generations to both male and female mice. Yep. 154. This proved that what you're exposed to in this life affects your next 4 generations. It confirms what I taught you of the genetic kiss. Also, what you watch, hear, eat, your fears, sexual habits, likes and dislikes pass on 4 generations. That also includes health, disease, and mental state. 155. So the mates you exchange body fluids with become part of your next 4 generations, and you inherit from each male his past 4 generations, which affects your Vanas Tasu, feminine, Fatir al Fatah, natural nature, and can make you more masculine, both physically and mentally. So you see the type of incarnation, you understand, which is what I think this section was called, incarnation problems. Yeah, because your body is the car. You understand? So you as a spiritual being now, in managing your universe, understood, you have to contend with these issues in the physical. Do you understand? So let's look at a few clips and videos dealing with just to understand on epigenetics. Yeah.
Have you ever wondered why you are the way you are?
Are you you because of your genes? Because of how you were raised? Or could it be both? Welcome back to Bogo Biology, and for this screencast we're going to discuss the concept of epigenetics and how it helps us to understand the interactions of nature and nurture in development.
Traditionally, we've said that acquired traits are not inherited, and this is true most of the time. For instance, this creature has yellow fur. It can choose to dye its fur neon pink, but it's still going to produce yellow offspring. However, as we learn more about genetics, we've come to realize that experiences actually can change gene expression. Factors such as diet, drug use, and chemical exposure can have a profound impact on our bodies. All 3 of these factors are capable of changing which genes are active and which genes are inactive. We used to believe that these changes in gene activation could not be passed on to offspring. However, we're recently discovering that these changes actually are heritable and can be passed on to children, grandchildren, and sometimes even great-grandchildren. Their genetic code itself has not been modified, but we have slightly changed which sections are active and which sections are inactive. These are heritable changes in gene expression that do not arise from changes to the DNA sequence itself. This is what we call epigenetics. Another way to think about this is that we've changed the organism's phenotype without changing its genotype. Understanding gene expression is crucial to understanding epigenetics, so here's a quick review. To begin with, every cell in the body contains the exact same DNA code. DNA acts like a blueprint for making every kind of protein that the body needs. The DNA is coiled up tightly inside the nucleus of the cell. A gene is a section of DNA that codes for a particular set of characteristics. Each cell type requires different traits, and thus they need to make different proteins. The cell uses one DNA code to make many proteins by utilizing different sections for different purposes. One cell type might use a certain section of the DNA molecule, and another type might use a different section. If a gene is in use and coding for proteins, we say that it is either turned on or expressed. So how exactly does epigenetics influence gene expression? There are actually a number of mechanisms, but the 2 about which we know the most are DNA methylation and histone modification. Remember that the interior of the DNA molecule is made up of 4 nitrogen bases: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and that these are connected together by hydrogen bonds. Methyl groups, which look like this, can attach to the DNA molecule. These methyl groups can attach to some of the cytosine nitrogen bases. The methyl groups prevent RNA polymerase, a key enzyme in the manufacturing of proteins, from effectively grabbing onto the DNA molecule. Since this section of DNA can no longer be used to code for proteins, we now call it a silenced gene. The gene has effectively been turned off. DNA is normally wrapped very tightly around protein complexes known as histones. It unspools a little bit at a time in order to be accessed and used, kind of like an old-fashioned reel-to-reel film. Adding methyl or acetyl groups to histones impacts the ease with which they unspool. As with DNA methylation, the addition of a methyl group will inhibit the manufacturing of proteins from a certain gene. This is because the methyl group attaches to the histone and causes the DNA to coil more tightly, making it more challenging for enzymes to gain access. Adding an acetyl group has the opposite effect. Acetyl groups are thought to loosen the wrapped DNA, making certain genes more accessible. The process of both methylation and acetylation of histones is actually reversible. The addition and removal of these groups is done by enzymes and can be repeated many times. Research has shown that exposure to toxic chemicals or a lousy diet can cause these acetyl and methyl groups to bind in the wrong place and either activate or silence the wrong genes. This is especially problematic if, for instance, the error caused a tumor suppressor gene to be silenced. Now let's talk about a few examples. We'll begin by discussing agouti mice. Certain mice have a mutation in a gene called the agouti gene. The mutation makes them obese and yellow, as well as being susceptible to heart disease and diabetes. We would expect these unhealthy mice to give birth to unhealthy offspring, but in 2003, Waterland and Gintel showed that it was possible to silence the agouti mutation. The female mice were fed a diet that was rich in methyl groups. The methyl groups seemed to silence the agouti gene, and the offspring were born healthy. Studies have also shown correlations between human maternal health and the health of the offspring. We encourage mothers to eat folic acid before and during their pregnancy because it helps with proper neural tube formation. Another famous experiment showed the effect of epigenetics on the stress response. Inside of the midbrain of a rat is a region known as the hippocampus. Within the hippocampus are structures known as glucocorticoid receptors, which help mediate the stress response. Receiving adequate care early in life seems to be a key factor. Baby rats who receive adequate care and grooming from their mothers in the first weeks of life appear to demethylate the genes for glucocorticoid receptor development. When we remove the methyl groups, it switches the genes on and allows for proper development of glucocorticoid receptors within the hippocampus. These rats generally grow up to become healthy and well-adjusted adults. If baby rats do not receive adequate care, however, they never develop the same level of glucocorticoid receptors. They also grew up to be highly anxious adults who had a very difficult time managing their stress response. There appears to be a strong relationship between maternal care and the development of a healthy stress response later in life. Researchers are looking into the possibility of a similar relationship in humans by studying victims of childhood trauma. Hopefully, in years to come, we will continue to expand our knowledge of epigenetics, how it impacts our lives, and the extent to which epigenetic changes might be reversible. Alright, that's pretty much it for this week. If you found this video useful, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel and also checking out some of my other videos. I put a lot of time and effort into creating them, and I'm always looking for new content ideas, so please leave your thoughts in the comment field below. Thanks for watching, and as always, please don't forget to subscribe.
Have you ever wondered how two genetically identical twins can be so drastically different? And what about how your everyday lifestyle choices can potentially increase your risk for developing diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's or diabetes? And what about how traumatic life experiences can affect the way you navigate personal relationships and manage stress decades down the road? Thankfully, epigenetics can help answer how all of this works. So to break it down into simpler terms, epi means upon, while genetics is the study of your genes and your DNA. So epigenetics is just a word used to describe the changes that happen around our DNA. You can think about it like this. The human genome, your entire collection of your genes, is like a music library. And each song in that library is a gene. Just like how each song in your music library has its own unique individual meaning to you that uniquely impacts you, our genes do the same thing. And just like how different people express themselves with different styles of music, our cells express themselves with different kinds of genes. And this is where epigenetics comes in. Epigenetics is what creates that unique playlist of genes for each cell type. And this control creates a very powerful influence on your biology, because how your genes are expressed affects how your cells work, which affects how they interact with one another, which affects your physical health, your mental health, your behavior, how you interact with others, and how you interact with your environment. You can think about these biological factors like they're characters in a musical. And while each character plays a different role of varying importance, unified in music, they come together to tell a story that is unique to you, your health, and your personality. But it's not just a one-way street. It doesn't just go from your genes to your cells, up through to your behavior and so forth, but the external factors, so the air you breathe, the food you eat, the people you interact with, the everyday decisions you make, all feeds back down and changes your epigenetics, which can also change your physical health and your mental health. So these external factors, they're kind of like the instruments in a musical. And while you don't see them during the show, they're still changing and impacting the overall message of your story too. So epigenetics has been studied for the last few decades, but the explosion and catalyst for its explosion has been the genetic revolution. So not too long ago, scientists completely mapped out the entire human genome. And with this major milestone accomplished, many in the scientific and medical communities thought that the answers to finding all disease cures could be found in our genes. But we're quickly finding out that this isn't the case, because epigenetic mechanisms are also involved in disease development, but they're often overlooked. Epigenetics actually can help us answer a lot of different questions across different fields of science. So what makes somebody more naturally resistant to a strain of COVID, whereas somebody else, when exposed to the same strain, ends up hospitalized? And what about crops? Why is it that some crops survive drastic environmental changes, while some might perish more quickly? The rise of epigenetics and epigenetic technologies has brought about some really exciting and innovative technologies used to study epigenetics and improve potential treatments for cancer and all kinds of diseases. And the difference of epigenetic technologies over genomic technologies is that they tell you how genes are getting selected. So with genomic technologies, they kind of tell you like what song is being added to the cellular library. But knowing which gene is involved in disease or which song is not enough. We also need to understand how they're getting selected for diseases. And that's what epigenomic technologies offer us. And while there's some really great technologies out there, two of them are called cut and run and cut and tag. And some of these advantages are that they work with a very small number of cells, and they can be modified to study as little as one single cell at a time. So think about that for a second. One malfunctioning cell is all it takes for cancer to develop. And now we have the ability to study the unique processes happening in that cell that lead to the development of cancer. Some of you may know somebody who is battling or has battled cancer before. You're probably aware that not everybody responds well to certain treatments, right? This is because different people have different epigenetic profiles. And by using these new technologies, we can start to develop treatments that are more individualized, more precise, and more effective for people who don't respond well to the conventional treatments available. But the potential applications of epigenetics don't stop there. Whether you study neuroscience, toxicology, immunology, agriculture, drug development, embryology, it's so crucial that we start applying these techniques because they can help us start to unravel the mysteries surrounding how our biology, our environments, and our experiences all interact to shape living things every day. By understanding how these epigenetic processes work, we could potentially prevent or reverse the negative outcomes associated with early life childhood abuse. We could potentially understand how environmental factors and toxicants in our environment impact our health and development and find ways to prevent those negative changes from happening. We can even potentially cure devastating diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. And by the way, the amazing thing about epigenetics is it doesn't just affect you and those around you, but scientists have found that it can be passed down across generations too. So for example, survivors of traumatic experiences like the Rwandan genocide and the Holocaust, a lot of those people developed PTSD as the result of those terrible experiences. And then their own children, who had not gone through that experience in their lifetime, also showed symptoms of PTSD and had higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone. So parents, grandparents, and future parents, keep in mind that your life experiences don't just end with you, but there's a potential of passing those down to future generations too. But don't worry, because you can pass down good experiences too. And the beauty of epigenetics is that you can change and you can adapt. And you can actually take control of your epigenetics, reverse those negative outcomes by doing things like going to therapy, exercising, eating healthy, taking medication. And isn't that so powerful, that these decisions you make in your life can make such a massive impact in your biology and gives you that control to better yourself? And so my hope for you all today is that your curiosity about epigenetics has been ignited. For those of you that are in science, I hope that this inspires you to apply epigenetics research to your academic studies and your lab work. And for most of you who are probably not in science, I hope this makes you want to learn more about epigenetics in general. And the next time you find yourself sitting in your car, listening to your favorite playlist, take that opportunity to reflect on your lifestyle, feel empowered by your choices, and decide to take control of that cellular playlist by living your healthiest, best lives for yourself and for future generations. Thank you.
Now, before I go into the next clip, I just want to talk just a little bit about that. Now, because now you sort of get some understanding, or if you're sort of paying attention to, remember, because we've obviously spoke to you previously in class and talked to you about the importance, obviously, of the genome. So 76% probably of your DNA, do you understand, is what when you describe like a static state. And 24% of your DNA is in a transient state, obviously affected by the environments that we're in. Do you understand? It's obviously changing based on those environmental factors. Do you understand? And so this is changing that understanding of what was previously thought of DNA. So like when DNA would be previously described as like if you would think about the RAM, the ROM of a computer, read-only memory of a computer. So you think about your computer, when you switch it on, it basically loads up or boots up in the same way, yeah, every single time. Do you understand? And basically, broadly, the user doesn't really change the RAM. It's sort of static. Do you understand? So that was the kind of understanding that was thought of about DNA. Do you understand? Like it's read-only memory. It doesn't change. What you're born with is how it sort of works, and it retains that way throughout your whole life. Now, this is obviously introducing the fact that you've got ROM, and what you see is RAM, if we're making a comparison to computer, where the RAM is dealing with how you use the computer every day, and do you understand? Because you obviously, when you first buy a computer, it works one way. As you start to use it over time, put different programs on it, so on and so forth, the computer will you understand? It'll still start up the sort of same way, but it can behave differently based on the programs that you've got. Sometimes it can work better, sometimes it works worse, do you understand, over time, and then you have to make corrections, clean things up, so on and so forth. You remove certain programs, you get viruses coming in. You understand? Very different to, as I say, when you first had the computer. So that's all that stuff's taking place in the sort of random access memory of a computer. In a similar way, and saying that 24% is in a transit state, it's reacting to the environment based on how you're behaving. But even at the starting point, remember, which maybe they haven't maybe made that point as well, is that in the formulation of you, yes, and your cells in terms of the way they're built, the DNA is one factor, but the RNA is the real intelligence, because the RNA interprets how the DNA should be expressed based on the environment. Do you understand? So we've got these now sort of factors, things that are taking place. Okay, well, depending on the person's area, depending on how they are, how they're born, environment, etc. Your RNA is going to interpret the DNA based on the environment you're in. When you're living, your DNA is going to, you know, change based on the environments that you sort of find yourself in. And then you've got this other generational impact factor that you have to contend with as well. Do you understand? And then obviously this is showing how those factors can lead to, as I say, what is expressing itself or not expressing itself going forward within the program, within your DNA. Do you understand? And so now the reason why we're sort of showing you this is because if you really fairly, do you understand? If you fairly look at the work Dr. Malachi KZ York has done, Nabab Yaanuwn, in this day and time, from the 60s, you understand, down to now, yeah, the things that were necessary to produce at least some amongst our race of people that could start to correct these problems, what would you need to set up? So if you were him now, having this understanding, how would you gone about it to set up? You need land. You need to create an environment. You need to control that environment at least sufficiently enough to, you understand, produce a set of genes that are going to seek to really express itself forward to a point where you're going to, at least in 4 generations, eradicate certain impurities and get at least a mindset that's in tune or aligned with how our ancestors are, and in a sense are, as opposed to this, as I say, hybrid that got created that looks Negro, do you understand, or looks like a Nagaru, but thinks like the Mukasu or the white man, and because of gene interference, do you understand, has the Mukasu genes inside of them that are going to be anti anything Natharu. Do you understand? Anti anything our ancestors. They're going to actively, you understand, go against it, because that's the nature, do you understand, of not only its origin, you understand, but how it was designed to do also. Do you understand? In order to them to propagate, they propagate or strengthen through adversity. Do you understand? Not through cooperation. So if you think about the type of approach that was needed, it would be anti how they would let that play out in a society today. Do you understand? You try and set up an environment where you need to, you understand, have, I suppose, people have leading to certain rules, you understand, living by, trying to clean up, clean living, whatever the case may be. Yeah, you're trying to raise the children a certain way, not too much external or outside influence. Do you understand? Now, obviously, if you don't, within a society like this, you don't take the children out and take them to Disneyland or whatever the case may be, have a McDonald's, whatever, once in a while. So they're not super, isolated from things that are going outside of the society. Then you're gonna raise crazy kids. So you need to have a little bit of a balance. Do you understand? In that regard, but it's a difficult proposition now to control environment, you understand, and obviously managing all these generational challenges and issues that are not necessarily visible on the outside, because all of this is inner workings, in the sense of a human being, and obviously different for each human being. So developing a methodology that is seeking really to correct what has happened requires obviously a significant amount of intelligence. Hence why you have a master teacher. Yeah, because you design a doctrine that has to deal with, if it's applied by the individual and accepted and applied, has to correct these issues, you understand, or at least give a pathway to make the person now want to now be on apply an approach, of self-preservation, as opposed to self-destructive behavior, which oftentimes can be interpreted as, well, I'm just having fun. You understand? I'm just having fun oftentimes leads to behaviors that are what? Detrimental. Well, I'm just having fun. So really what that means in certain instances in this society is, well, when I'm having fun because it's my birthday or it's some other day, or I've worked hard this week, so I'm going to have fun on the weekend, it means discipline is, the controls and the discipline is out the window. Let me live dangerously now for whatever, the weekend, and then I'll go back to normality or whatever on the Monday, for example. Do you understand? So why is fun destructive? I'm not saying it all is, but a lot of the time it's self-destructive behaviors as opposed to self-preserving behaviors. Do you understand? That's associated with us having a good time. Do you understand? So not in all instances, but a lot of it relates to that. Well, I was just having fun, or people rewriting history. Well, I stepped around, but that doesn't really count. That wasn't really. But now people are doing that now, isn't it? Well, I've not been in a relationship before. This time I've slept with 30 people, in the saying, or I had sexual contact with 30 people. I say, no, I've never been in a relationship before. I've never had a girlfriend. I've never had a boyfriend. You understand? But you've had sexual contact. Now, I'm not saying to say that, you know, at one time that meant, if you're not saying that you was with somebody that was your boyfriend, but what I'm saying to you is that if you had sexual contact with an individual, that was one on your, whatever the word is, body count. That was one person on your body count who you had sexual contact with, or you exchanged fluids. That was one. What you wasn't doing is saying, well, I've had sexual contact with 30 people, but I've never been in a relationship. So when I do now enter into my first relationship, I'm saying that's my first boyfriend. You understand? Or that's my first whatever girlfriend. But you've had all this sexual contact prior or beforehand. You see? So it's not a fair and proper accountability of the change that's sort of taking place. So coming back around, you can see now, if for us now to where we've had the interception within our genes, a negative interception within our genes, yeah, what would you have to do now to correct it? Because you need to think about the environmental factors. You need to think about who people are going to mix with going forward. Do you understand? And you need to correct, obviously, or fix the problems. Do you understand? In terms of the knowledge which people are taking on board and the behaviors they're expressing, if you want to get change going forward. Do you understand? So it's interesting to think that, yeah, any new type of approach, let's say, as they classify them, New Age religions, for example, when they're seeking to express, let's say, a change in a group of human beings going forward, what happens in this society is that they're going to get attacked. Do you understand? But using the word cult. Do you understand? Because they want to keep them in the old ways of doing things, the old mindset. Do you understand? Which we're going to, as we step forward, maybe in the next part of this class, you can see you're being set up to be used docile just to be food. That's what basically religion, monotheistic religion, is doing. Do you understand? It's setting you up, yeah, to be sacrificed. Yeah, setting you up to be sacrificed. Do you understand? Savior. You understand? But in that context, you save something for later use. So what are you being saved for? Do you understand? So in that context, they're not saving you from yourself. They're saving you to be used later or utilized later. You understand? In this context, for food or labor. You understand? One of those two things. So you can see now the problem that you face is that they want to keep people, because when they talk, Master made a really interesting point to say the reason why a lot of people want to focus on the old stuff, so to speak. So even in Wu-Sabat, people focus on old books. You understand? They want to go back to being Ansars. They want to go back to whatever, certain elements of Christianity, they want to stay in the Bible, stay in the Quran, stay in the Torah, you understand, these books, and hark back to old times, is because that's where 6 ether forces are strongest. Yeah, those forces, that is where they are strongest. So by people wanting to hold us back, not want to accept the new knowledge, new ways of doing things, the new approach, new mindset, is because they want to retain, in a sense, or empower the forces that kept us oppressed. Do you understand? That was necessary, or you were fed that, as I say, as the antidote, the old school, so to speak, stuff was an antidote. You understand? To get rid of the poison within, you have to fight it sometimes with the same poison. Yes, because you're creating, excuse me, antibodies against the, do you understand? Against the poison. Do you understand? By forcing the body with a slightly different mindset. Understood? Excuse me. And in this case, I think it was expressed earlier in the introduction, is by using truth. Yeah, because truth, or teaching somebody the truth about a certain degree of information, understood, yeah, meant that basically they learned it in a way where, so you learned Christianity to do the best of Christians in a positive way, but now when I pull you out of it by showing you the errors of it, you were doing that in awareness. You wasn't doing it from a state of ignorance. You were doing it from awareness. Yeah, these are the mistakes, these are the problems, these are this. It's true according to that, but it's not factual. You understand? Outside of that arena. Do you understand? So the same thing was done to you with Islam, same thing done to you with Judaism. Then you stepped into Samaria. The same thing was done. So as you walked back into these steps, you are being empowered to make those corrections. Now, somebody joining today doesn't need to go through all of that whole Bible and Quran, all that. They don't need to absorb all of that poison in order to make the corrections. They can absorb Wu-Sabat, excuse me, and apply it in its form right now. Do you understand? And us learning it today, for example, makes it easier for the future generations to learn it. So these are the things that maybe we were not paying attention to. Do you understand? But remember, their etheric ancestors and their ancestors that are driving them, extraterrestrial and etheric ancestors that are driving them, understood, are aware of these things going forward, and that's why you get counters coming into play. Do you understand? To at least provide a fair chance for our race to progress, having been under the Mukasu for so long. But what better way to to mash up the program, so to speak, than to be inside of your genes? You understand? Inside. They're fighting from within, the enemy within. Do you understand? But as it always says, the solution or the savior is within you as well. You understand? Once now, at least this right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding into right overstanding, leading to sound right reasoning, once that was placed within your genes or your genetics, it gave you the ability now to fight, you understand, those same forces from within you. Do you understand? Or at least remove them so that the real you can start to express itself proper. Do you understand? Not imposter syndrome and all these other traumas that you're having to grow up with. Some of us don't know a life without racism. You understand? You don't know a life without it. So, and as we touched upon in some previous classes, the drain that it has on your psychology on a daily basis. Do you understand? Where you don't quite know whether it is or isn't. Your subconscious mind is now flicking between the two, and it's draining. You understand? And how we hadn't put the right type of protections in place to help ourselves. You understand? So all of this now, and look how old this scroll, let's say old, but it's certainly coming up to a proof. Maybe, I don't know, you're thinking its configuration now, it's coming up to a decade now, how old this book is. Do you understand? But it's a reiteration of a lot of the self-help principles that were taught when the 9 ball was written for us in the 60s. Do you understand? It was just in a language that was so heavy, it was difficult for people to grasp. Do you understand? But it's a self-help tool for the race. Do you understand? And it sets out what needs to be done, what needs to be corrected. Do you understand? To deal with, as I say, the gargantuan task of correcting this. But it starts with each individual. Do you understand? In terms of them applying it, to this methodology, as I say, to themselves. All right. Any questions before I continue to the next section?
No,
No,
no questions.
Okay.
no questions on this side either.
Quiet crowd today. All right, let's go on to the next clip. May stop there for the day. Let's go on to the next clip.
Memories shouldn't be inherited. We know this intuitively, also from our experience. Also, for example, if you read a book, you know that your kids won't know its content. Or if you go to the gym, you know that your kids won't become stronger as a result. This is obvious, and acquired traits should not be inherited. But nevertheless, many scientists over the years tried to examine whether nevertheless our experiences in life do affect the biology of our children. And I'll tell you very briefly the sad history of this field, which is filled with controversies and all kinds of crazy stories. So about 100 years ago, a scientist named Paul Kammerer, who was very famous at the time, was working here in Vienna, was studying a toad that is called the midwife toad because the males carry the eggs. And he used this toad in an attempt to show that acquired traits and memories can transfer to the next generation. There are two types of toads that Kammerer studies. One that lives on land and one that lives underwater. And they are different in terms of their appearance and also abilities. He claimed that he can take the toad that normally lives on land and train it by changing the cultivation conditions for a few generations until it evolves to become a toad that lives underwater. And when it did so, it also changed its appearance, and he claimed that it grew these black nupital pads, these structures on the hands that, for toads that live underwater, help the male grab the female without slipping. This was an amazing discovery, which questions lots of what we know about how evolution and biology works. However, his story ended sadly because he was accused of cheating. He was accused of injecting ink to the hands of the toads, and he couldn't handle the accusation, and he killed himself. Then, later in the 60s and 70s in the US, a very different character, James McConnell, tried to do even wilder experiments to prove that memory can be inherited. He was studying a worm that is called planaria, which is the champion of regeneration. So if you cut off the planaria's head, it grows a new head after a few days, about a week, including the brain and everything. And he claimed that he can teach this planaria certain things, certain memories, and then chop off its head, and the new head that will grow will still contain the memories that the previous generation acquired. He did even wilder things. These planaria are also cannibals, so they eat each other. So he fed naive worms with worms that he taught certain things, and he claimed that the memory transferred by digestion. And this was very wild. Many people didn't believe him, but that was the least of his concerns because he received a bomb from the terrorist known as the Yaanuwn bomber and exploded. And this is how I started working on this topic. Thank you. The difference was that I decided to study this using a simpler worm that is called C. elegans, which is a very important model for biology, studying genetics and neurobiology. And so after I finished my PhD, I went to New York to study this with Oliver Hobart, a famous neurobiologist in Columbia University. And I'm still in love with this worm. I still study it today, almost a decade after. It's a great model for many things, especially for studying inheritance, genetics, and neurobiology. The reason that it's just such a good model is that, first of all, it reproduces very fast. the generation time is very fast. So you have a new generation every 3 days, so you can study many generations fast. Second, every mother produces something like 250 babies. So you have large numbers and good statistics. And the third thing is that its brain is extremely simple. So it has just 300 neurons in the brain, 300 brain cells. We have many billions, so it's much, much more complex. And, but before I tell you what I discovered using this worm, you need to understand why, in theory, memories should not be inherited. There are a few reasons. The main reason is that we have two types of cells in our body. Somatic cells, which are the regular cells of the body, like blood cells and neurons and muscles. And we have germ cells. These are the sperm and the egg. And these are the only cells that can transmit DNA to the next generations. So, for example, if you go to the gym and you practice and you build up muscles, since it doesn't affect the DNA in your germ cells, the sperm and the egg, it doesn't lead to inheritance. And this is a fundamental principle. It's called the second law of biology, the first being natural selection. And it's also known as the soma to germline barrier. The germline is segregated from the soma. And the man who discovered this barrier is August Weismann. This is why it's also called the Weismann barrier. And he is one of Darwin's most prominent followers. He worked in the 19th century, and he had many seminal contributions, many important discoveries. But he wanted to prove that what happens in the soma stays in the soma, and that we cannot inherit acquired traits. And to do so, although he was a great biologist, he did an experiment which wasn't that great. In fact, even George Bernard Shaw wrote a play that mocks this experiment. What he did was, for many consecutive generations, he cut off the tails of mice in every generation. And he suggested that the fact that they kept growing long tails and that the short tails were not inherited shows that inheritance of acquired traits can't happen. Of course, we know this also from circumcision. We didn't need these experiments, but still it convinced the scientific world and became really a fundamental dogma. Okay? When I came to study this, I had a different idea. I knew, of course, that DNA doesn't transfer between somatic cells and germ cells. And what happens in the soma to the DNA, if you get a mutation in your hand, it doesn't affect the DNA in your germ cells, which is the only DNA that counts for the next generation. But I thought that maybe another type of molecule would be able to transmit memories between generations. And the molecules that I thought about were small RNA molecules. RNA is a close cousin of DNA. It's a more ancient molecule that evolved before. The world used to be an RNA world, and RNA enabled inheritance before DNA existed. And I had reasons to believe that maybe small RNAs would be able to move from the soma to the germline, because we knew, at least in C. elegans, in these worms, that they move between cells. What small RNAs do is, inside cells, they regulate gene activity. So they decide which genes will function and which won't. Okay. So to study this, I did a very simple experiment. Worms, this worm that I'm studying, C. elegans, is remarkably resistant to viruses. There are no viruses that efficiently infect it. As the reason is that when you infect it with a virus, the worm produces small RNAs that match the viral genome and lead to its destruction. They simply chop it up. And there was a Nobel Prize awarded for this discovery, for how these small RNAs work. What I showed, this was very new and exciting at the time, was that small RNAs work not only in the parents, but they are also transmitted to the next generation, and to the next generation, and to the next generation, to effectively vaccinate the kids. So if the kids are again challenged with viruses, they are already protected. So it's a heritable vaccine, an acquired trait, viral resistant, that was passed on to the next generation. This also allowed us to study the mechanism of how it works. We learned a lot about the genes involved and so on. The next thing was that we thought that maybe it's not only about viruses. Maybe other traits can also be regulated using the same mechanism, and other memories can transfer between generations. And specifically, I was thinking about the memory of starvation. And the reason is that the biggest epidemiological study that has been done on humans, on transmission of responses between generations, was done on people that survived starvations in the past. In the Second World War, the Nazis starved large populations in the Netherlands. And people studied there are many descendants, the descendants of the individuals that were starved. And they saw that although there are no changes to their DNA as a result of the starvation, because this can't happen, the descendants suffer more from diabetes and from other neurological diseases such as schizophrenia. Of course, this is extremely difficult to study in humans or in mice because they're so complex. But I thought maybe worms can explain it. Maybe what's being transmitted here are small RNAs. And this is a different type of inheritance than DNA. It's new rules of inheritance. To study this, we can do a really good starvation experiment in worms because we can really control their conditions. So what we did is we took worms and we either starved them or not. And when we starved the worms, we found that, that they make small RNAs that regulate the function of nutrition-related genes. They regulate their nutrition. But not only that, the interesting part was that these small RNAs moved also to the children, to the grandchildren, and to the great-grandchildren, and protected them and changed their nutrition-related genes as well. And this had real consequences on the physiology of the kids. So the descendants of starved worms lived significantly longer, and we now know that they are also more protected if you challenge them again with a much more difficult period of starvation. So it seems adaptive. The holy grail, one of the holy grails of this new field is to think whether the brain can generate heritable responses, whether memories that are formed in the brain are inherited, because normally when we think of memories that the brain can generate, and these are special memories. And this sounds crazy that you'll think about something, you learn it, and then it will be inherited. But we wanted to study this in worms, and we showed that in fact it happens. So small RNA changes in the brains of worms lead to transgenerational changes that affect multiple generations. If you change the production of small RNAs in the brains of the ancestors, it changes the physiology and the behavior of the descendants, even the grandchildren. So we've shown that small RNAs that are made in the ancestors' brains are needed so that the kids and the grandkids can search food efficiently. Otherwise, they can't find food, which is also obviously very critical. Since over the years, we discovered many types of environments that lead to transgenerational changes. And now we want to understand the rules of how it happens, because it's very different from the normal rules of genetics that we know essentially for 150 years since the monk Mendel discovered them. And so, for example, we want to know for how long do their responses last. And we found a mechanism that we call the transgenerational timer, which governs the duration of the heritable responses. And normally responses last only 3 to 5 generations, and then they are erased. And we found that this clock is constituted from genes, is built on genes that set the exact time. And we can manipulate these genes and control the duration of the response, and also make responses that would just last indefinitely and be stable. We call these genes MOTEC genes. It's an acronym that is short for Modified Transgenerational Epigenetic Kinetics, and also MOTEC means sweetheart in Hebrew. And now this is, I'm ending here, this is my last slide. I want to say, and this is a very important message that has to come across, that we have no idea whether this is happening also in humans. We just don't know, okay? So there's no need to be worried or anything like that, because we have no idea. Many things were discovered in simple organisms and later found to be true in humans, but we have no idea that this is one of them. I certainly hope so, but we don't know. If memories are inherited also in humans, it might mean that you have a greater responsibility for your actions because you're affecting multiple generations. But we don't know that's the case. But I think that regardless of whether memory is inherited in humans or not, it's probably a good idea to act as if it does. So thank you very much.
Right, so you got some ideas there, and there's random clips. You can do some more research if you're minded to look into that detail. But it's showing you how far advanced that you were in terms of getting this understanding into an overstanding of what takes place. Do you understand? As you incarnating into a human body, do you understand? And how you manage, as I say, the carnal aspect of it and the things that you have to concern yourself and think about. And obviously others understanding that to some degree in the way of them knowing how to then disrupt, disrupt the natural plans that if left uninterfered with, if that's a word, do you understand, or not troubled, what would we have grown into, do you understand, without this interception intervention? And the answer, in fact, is given in Master Secret number 1. Do you understand? Because in there it sets out the 24 tests that our ancestors, the Panatharu, left or expected us to have completed in the last 24,000 year cycle. So things there from mastering the human genome to achieving time travel. And the fact that in this last 6,000 years, the intervention of the Makasu, do you understand, or the Caucasian race, intercepting or interfering with our genes or their opposition to our development, interfering, whether it's coming into our countries uninvited, do you understand, invading themselves, etc., has stifled, them trying and attempting to civilize us because they thought we were savages and introducing their poisonous religions into our cultures, has stifled us. Where, as I say, we are where man and woman, as we expressed earlier, is only one step above beast and divine hierarchy of things, and what we should have achieved for ourselves in the last 24,000 years now to roll over into this next 24,000 year cycle where it's now seemingly supposed to be by all of the order of things our time, but are we doing the things necessary to affect the changes by internalizing this excuse me, the new doctrine information through Wu-Sabat, the spiritual science, to fight against, as I say, the adverse DNA and genes and the changes that have happened generationally as a result of their interventions over the last 6,000 years and more acutely in the last 400 years. Yeah, so I think it's a good place to stop. So we will continue this next time. Yeah, and kick into more, as I say, get into a bit more around some of the changes that have happened, going into a bit more around the blood types, re-explore, because I know we've covered it before, but the sort of RNA, rhesus negative and rhesus positive. And so you can see how certain things, because we don't come from the simian gene or the monkey, but you have to understand why it was introduced or intercepted in our DNA in certain instances as a form of protection. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail next week and hopefully get to the end of this section. So we'll talk to you about, I think we've touched on probably before, but what really is a white person and what is not, and how some white people have black characteristics inside of them that makes it difficult to produce. So you've got situations where you've got Caucasian females, for example, who may have black ovaries. Do you understand? And so we'll explore this sort of compatibility issue. As I say, most people on the planet are not white, basically. They're not Mukasu. Do you understand? So we'll explore that in some detail, as I say, and make it clear, make it plain. You understand? But hopefully I don't say hopefully, but you should have got an appreciation. Certainly, if you're new to this, then it's slightly different. But if you've certainly been following the Master Teacher for a long time, you understand, well, okay, but this is what they were seeking to, and by way of our ancestors, this is what they're seeking to. Environment is important. Do you understand? This is why in ancient times, you understand, we built the environment that matched outer space. Do you understand? So we built heaven on earth to control the environment, because obviously that's, it was touched upon in the introduction. Yeah, that's our ascension journey. Do you understand? To go back to, in and beyond, obviously, the stars. Do you understand? That's where we came from. and that's our genetic right, obviously, to restore it back. Not this planet's not important; it is to us, and it's rightfully was designed for our DNA, and so it was optimized for us and our environment. You understand? But we're not restricted to one place in terms of our growth in our ascension. Do you understand? So obviously this planet needs to be fixed, corrected, cleansed. Do you understand? Of all the sort of man infesting the planet and woman infesting the planet, which is going on right now, seeking to destroy it. But it in and of itself will seek to rid itself of any sort of impurities as it makes its own dimensional shift to higher states of energy at 7, 8, and 9 ether in this next shift, and we have to be aligned with that ascension journey if we are to survive in the hereafter, into the thereafter, which we're in right now. Any questions before we close?
No questions.
There are no questions.
Okay, then. So we're back again next week, next Sunday, same time. So let your people know, and we'll seek to get the recording of this out at some point this week. Yeah. So appreciate everybody's time. We will catch you next time with the next part of this epigenetics, the enemy and the savior within class. Yeah. Okay, everybody, take care. And we will see you very, very soon.